The parking lot of the RV dealership on the north side of Mesa, Arizona, stretched out in the afternoon heat like a promise that was bigger than it needed to be. Hundreds of vehicles lined up in rows under the white desert sky, each one gleaming and wrapped in graphics suggesting mountains and lakes, and a kind of pastoral freedom that the landscape immediately surrounding the dealership, a frontage road and a storage facility and a gas station, did not provide any evidence of. Salespeople moved between the rows in polo shirts, pausing to greet anyone who slowed their walk near a vehicle, trained to read body language for the gap between browsing and wanting, which was a gap they were paid to close. The RVs themselves sat in the sun and looked new and smelled of manufactured comfort when you opened their doors, and the prices on the windshields were written in a font designed to make large numbers seem friendly. Frank Holloway walked through that lot in March of 2009 and left without talking to anyone. He was 54 years old, and he had been living out of his truck for 11 weeks, which was long enough to have converted his initial understanding of his situation from a temporary inconvenience into a settled fact that required a plan. The plan he had developed involved finding something livable for under $2,000, because $2,000 was approximately what he had, which meant not this dealership or any dealership, which was a conclusion he had arrived at before entering the lot, but which the experience of walking through it had confirmed and deepened. What $2,000 bought you in the RV market was not in any showroom in Mesa or anywhere else. What it bought you was in private listings, estate sales, the gravel lots of auto auctions, the side yards of people who had acquired something in a moment of optimism and were now divesting themselves of it with varying degrees of honesty about its condition. Frank had learned things in 11 weeks that he had not previously known and would not have sought out had his situation not made the seeking necessary. He had learned the geography of heat in Phoenix, which was more specific than he'd understood, how certain underpasses held the day's warmth into the early morning hours, and others were wind tunnels that dropped the temperature 5 degrees below the ambient and made a bad night significantly worse. He had learned which library parking lots were monitored and which were not, and which coffee shops had single-stall bathrooms that allowed for a full wash-up in the manner of someone who needed to look presentable for job applications without having access to the facilities that presentability normally assumed. He had learned the rhythms of the food bank at the church on Dobson Road and the smaller, less formal distribution that happened in the park near Van Buren on Tuesday evenings from the back of a cargo van driven by a quiet man named Reuben, who never asked questions and whose contributions to the people who showed up were organized and reliable in a way that Frank had come to appreciate, with a depth of gratitude he hadn't previously had access to. And he had learned by necessity to look at vehicles the way a doctor looks at patients, or the way a foreman looks at a work site, with the specific attention of someone whose well-being is directly connected to what they see and what they do with the information. Frank had worked for 20 years in building inspection, which was exactly the kind of training that made him useful in this particular situation, and useless in almost every conventional job he'd applied for since his department was eliminated in the fall of 2008, along with most of the rest of the county's discretionary staff. He knew what materials failed and why, and what the failure looked like at the beginning versus at the end, and he knew how to tell the difference between a problem that was cosmetic and a problem that was structural, and he knew that the single most important question about any system was not whether it was currently working but why, because a thing that worked for the wrong reasons or for no knowable reason was a thing that would stop working at a moment determined by factors you couldn't see and couldn't control. He applied this knowledge to the problem of finding an RV, and he developed, over a period of about 3 weeks of looking at listings and visiting vehicles and talking to owners, a set of criteria that had nothing to do with the criteria the dealership's polo shirts were trained to emphasize. He wrote them down in the notebook he kept in the glove compartment of the truck in the precise, abbreviated hand of someone who had spent a career making field notes, and when people who later came to him in similar situations asked him what to look for, he read from the notebook with the directness of someone who had tested these things against reality and was not interested in adding softness to information that needed to be hard. The first thing on his list was water intrusion. Not the water systems, those could be replaced. The structure. He had seen in his inspection years how water entry worked, not as a dramatic flood but as a long, slow conversation between moisture and material, conducted in the spaces behind panels and under flooring and inside walls, producing the particular kind of rot that was soft and spongy and dark and that smelled when disturbed, like something organic that had been given too much time and too little air. He had seen RVs that looked fine from the outside and from the inside and that were, in their structural members, essentially gone. The test was specific. He pressed the floor at the corners and around the base of walls with the heel of his hand and felt for softness. He pressed the ceiling near the roof vents and felt for give. He ran his hands along the bottom trim where the side wall met the floor on the exterior and felt for delamination, the point where the layers separated, which happened when water had been getting in long enough to compromise the adhesive. If anything was soft, he left. The second thing was the roof. He asked permission and climbed every roof he considered seriously, and he walked it slowly, because a roof you could walk across told you things a visual inspection from the ground could not. He was looking for seams that had lost their seal, which showed as fine cracks in the caulk, or as places where the sealant had separated from the surface it was bonded to, and was sitting in proximity, rather than in contact. He was looking for depressions where water pooled rather than sheeting off, because pooling water found its way through eventually regardless of the current state of the seal. He was looking for soft spots in the roof membrane itself, which were rare but which indicated that the substrate had already been compromised. The caulk and the sealant were the first line, and they could be replaced for under $40 of materials and a few hours of labor. The substrate was the second line, and replacing it was a full gut job that a $2,000 budget could not contain. The third thing was the frame. On a travel trailer, the frame was typically steel, and the steel corroded, and the corrosion happened from the bottom up where it was wettest, and from the inside of the tubes where moisture collected and sat. He looked for surface rust, which was cosmetic and easily addressed. He looked for bubbling paint over the frame members, which was the rust's way of announcing what was happening underneath before it became visible. He looked for welds that had cracked, which happened when the frame had been asked to flex over rough roads over many years, and the fatigue had accumulated to the point of failure. He carried a screwdriver and pressed it against any area of the frame that looked compromised to check whether it was rust on top of steel or rust that had replaced the steel entirely. And the difference between those two conditions was the difference between a cosmetic problem and a structural, one that could not be made safe. There is a kind of knowledge that only comes from having been forced to pay attention to things that most people can afford to have someone else pay attention to, and the specific vocabulary of vehicle condition that Frank developed in those weeks is exactly the kind of practical literacy that determines whether a marginal budget produces a livable situation or a series of cascading, expensive failures. The Crisis Craft Field Manual, linked in the bio, covers this territory from the ground up, specifically for people who are making these decisions with limited resources and limited margin for error. It's built for the person standing in a stranger's driveway with $2,000 and a notebook and an hour to figure out whether this vehicle is the solution to their problem or an extension of it. If you're in that position or might be, it's worth having before you need it. He found the vehicle he was looking for in the second week of April. It was a 1996 Skyline Nomad, a 22-foot travel trailer, listed by the estate of a man in Tempe who had owned it for 12 years and used it primarily at a lakeside lot in northern Arizona and who had died the previous fall. The estate sale was being managed by the man's daughter who lived in California, knew nothing about RVs, wanted it gone, and had priced it at $1,700 in the hope that it would sell quickly to someone who would deal with it without requiring her to fly back out. Frank examined it for 2 hours in the driveway of the dead man's house while the daughter stood nearby in the shade, checking her phone. The roof was sound. He had walked it twice and checked every seam and found one area near the front cap where the sealant was cracking but had not yet separated, which he could address with a tube of self-leveling lap sealant and a 2-hour afternoon. The floor was solid at every point he tested, including the bathroom, which was the highest risk area and the one most likely to harbor invisible water damage. The frame showed surface rust in a few locations on the lower rear cross members, nothing that affected the steel underneath. The water systems were inoperative in the specific way that things become inoperative when they've been winterized and not unwinterized, which was a starting condition, not a damage condition. The propane furnace started on the third try, which was within the range of reasonable for a unit that had been sitting, and when it started, it ran steadily through the cycle without the inconsistencies that indicated a heat exchanger problem. The roof vents opened and closed and latched correctly. The The slide, if you could call the small dining extension a slide, extended and retracted without binding. The things that needed attention were real but finite. The city water connection had a cracked fitting that would need replacement. One of the two coach batteries was dead in a way that was final and not reversible. The LP regulator was old enough that replacing it was the correct decision regardless of its current state. The wheel bearings would need to be repacked before any serious road use. These were real costs, but they were costs he could enumerate and schedule and address in a specific order, which was exactly the kind of problem he could handle as opposed to the kind he could not. He offered $1,500. The daughter, who was looking at her phone, said yes without negotiating. What would you have done, standing in that driveway, knowing that what you were about to buy was the place you would be living for an unknown period of time, that the $1,500 represented nearly everything you had, and that the person selling it was in another conversation on her phone and couldn't tell you much about the vehicle's history beyond that her father had loved it? There's something clarifying about a decision made under those conditions. Leave your thoughts in the comments. He parked the Nomad in the lot off Lower Buckeye Road, where a loose community of vehicle dwellers had been establishing themselves for several months, in the specific arrangement that such communities develop without planning, by proximity and by the informal social geometry of people who are managing similar situations and are more useful to each other near than far. There were perhaps 20 vehicles there that first week, everything from a van with solar panels and a rooftop deck to a school bus that appeared to have been converted by someone who had very specific ideas about interior design that had not been fully executed, to several cars that were simply cars and whose owners slept in them with varying degrees of apparent comfort. The man who introduced himself the first evening was named Otis. He was in his 60s, had been living in a succession of vehicles for 4 years, and had opinions about everything Frank had done and had not done in the acquisition and setup of the Nomad that he shared freely and in order of what he considered their importance. He thought the frame situation was fine. He thought the battery decision was correct but underpowered, and that a single Group 27 deep cycle was not going to be adequate for any but the most minimal use without shore power. He thought the cracked fitting on the city water connection was a symptom and not a cause, and that Frank should run a pressure test on the whole fresh water system before trusting it, because fittings did not crack from nothing, and there was a pressure problem somewhere in that system that had made the fitting fail. He thought the window seals on the forward bedroom were suspect and should be checked before the monsoon season arrived in July. Frank wrote all of this down in the notebook. Then he thanked Otis and started working. The water system pressure test confirmed what Otis had suspected, a failed pressure regulator at the city water inlet, which had been allowing line pressure to transfer directly to the coach's plumbing rather than stepping it down to the safe range, and which had over time stressed every fitting in the system, not just the visible one that had cracked. Frank replaced the regulator, which cost $12, and retested, and then went fitting by fitting through the accessible plumbing looking for ones that had been stressed to the point of incipient failure, finding 2 more under the bathroom floor that were not yet leaking but that were showing the same microcracking pattern as the one that had given out. He replaced those as well and filled the entire system and ran it under pressure for 24 hours, checking every accessible joint and looking for the shadow of moisture that indicated a slow leak. Nothing leaked. He repacked the wheel bearings over 2 days, working with the methodical attention of someone who understood that bearings were the kind of problem that gave you one warning in the form of the first bearing and no warning in the form of the second one. He cleaned the cups and cones with solvent, inspected each roller for pitting and wear, packed them with fresh grease of the correct specification, adjusted the preload, and torqued the castle nuts to the manufacturer's specification, which he found in a service manual he'd requested through the library's interlibrary loan system from a catalog of recreational vehicle documentation, a piece of research that Otis found impressive and said so. The roof seal took an afternoon. The battery situation he solved for $44 at a salvage yard that had recently processed a fleet of electric forklifts and had the 6-volt deep-cycle batteries from those forklifts stacked in rows at the back of the lot, each one tested and priced individually, the best of them at $22 each. The man in the van with the solar panels, whose name turned out to be Barry, helped Frank mount 2 of the batteries in a ventilated compartment he built from plywood inside one of the Nomad Exterior storage bays wired in series for 12 volts with a total storage capacity that was 4 times what the original single battery had provided. Barry was generous with his knowledge in the way that people in those communities tended to be when they'd spent enough time there to understand that someone else knowing how to do things was, in the aggregate, more valuable than being the only one who knew how to do them. The community that had established itself in the lower Buckeye lot had the character that these communities tend to have, which was compressed and specific in a way that conventional neighborhoods rarely achieved. 20 people sharing a parking lot learned each other's situations faster and more completely than 20 people sharing a street did in years, not by prying but by proximity and by the natural tendency of people under shared pressure to be honest about what the pressure was. Frank knew, within 2 weeks, who among them had children and what the school situation was, who was working and at what, who had a vehicle problem they didn't know how to solve, and who had a skill that someone else needed. He knew that a woman named Sandra, who was managing a serious illness alongside everything else, was regularly running out of propane before her weekly stipend arrived, and was spending cold nights in her car as a result, and that this was a problem he could partially address by occasionally contributing from the 5-gallon cylinder. He kept his overflow. He did this without making it into a transaction or a favor that required acknowledgement, because Sandra was not someone who would accept help that came with a social cost attached, a judgment he made from watching her for a week, and that turned out to be accurate. By June, the Nomad was running the way a well-maintained vehicle runs, which is to say that it ran without requiring Frank to think about it much, and that the absence of mechanical preoccupation freed him to address the other categories of his situation with the focused attention they deserved. He had found part-time inspection work with a private real estate firm that valued his experience and was willing to structure the arrangement around his availability, which was not a permanent solution but was a functional one. He kept the notebook current and updated it with new observations as the seasons changed and new problems emerged and were solved, creating over time a kind of personal field manual for the specific life he was living, in the specific vehicle, in the specific environment. The lot off Lower Buckeye Road changed over those months. People arrived and left as they always do in those places. Some of the situations resolved in the direction of stability. Some went the other direction. The vehicle community was not a fixed thing but a flowing one, and what held it together was not constancy of membership but constancy of approach. The willingness to share what you knew, to help with what you could, to ask for help in the specific way that acknowledged both the need and the competence of the person being asked, which was the way that preserved dignity on both sides of the transaction. Frank stayed in the Nomad for 14 months. When he left it, he sold it for $2,100 to a couple who had been sleeping in their car for 6 weeks, and who needed what he'd made of it more than he needed to recoup the full value of the work he'd put into it. He showed them the notebook. He walked them through the systems he'd built and the repairs he'd made. He pointed out the things that would need attention before the next monsoon season and told them what to do about them. He left them with a vehicle that he had maintained with the same meticulous attention that had made him useful in building inspection for 20 years, and that could be trusted to do what it was supposed to do for whoever came next. To everyone who stayed through this one, the difference between a $2,000 solution and a $2,000 disaster is almost always the quality of attention paid before the purchase and during the ownership. It is a learnable skill, and it is a transferable one, and it belongs to whoever is willing to develop it. There is another story on this channel about someone who built something similar out of something nobody expected, and it is worth the time it takes to watch it. It is waiting for you on the channel now.